Dr. Ritter has talked me through many technical things in my career, including audiovisual and the World Wide Web connections. Okay, so I have, unfortunately, still yet nothing to disclose. I will say everything that I am discussing is strictly my opinion. This has nothing to do with any kind of official statement from the military. And when I found out that this was going to be a well-documented talk, apparently Sages is very good at their connectivity. I actually took out all the personal photos that I had, and I used all stock photos from Google because it ended up being a bunch of my teammates and platoon guys with black bars over their faces, and it just seemed a little ridiculous. Okay, so some objectives. I want to talk about the type of individual that kind of goes into either special operations or surgery in general, because within the military, there's a subset of people that enter spec ops, and then within medicine, obviously, there's a subset of people that enter surgery. And I want to try to correlate some of those similarities and some of the differences, and then identify kind of some of the lessons that I've learned and as a SEAL officer that's kind of I've been able to translate to my civilian practice, and then just lessons learned in general about leadership. So I say NSW, or Naval Special Warfare. SEAL, of course, is an acronym: Sea, Air, Land. The history is irrelevant right now, back from World War II, the underwater demolition teams, the famed frogmen. But if I go back and forth between NSW and SEAL, just recognize I'm really talking about the same topic. So, as Matt said, just briefly about me. So I did college up in Boston. I did ROTC. I went straight from graduation out to San Diego, did my training, did a couple platoons, and then got completely out of the Navy. Then got my first bill for civilian medical school. I got back into the Navy, took the scholarship again, and then spent some time in the military, finished my training and fellowship, did a whole bunch of deployments, and then I got out. And it's really what's in red is the reason that Dr. Ritter has asked me to talk today. My time as an NSW officer, but then my time now as a civilian surgeon. So to talk about some of the work comparisons between a SEAL and a surgeon. So obviously we really train to perfection. And certainly that's true through all aspects of the military and all aspects of medicine. But I think you can recognize that there are just certain elements where you really have to have basically a zero failure rate in order for the success of the mission. And that's never more evident than as it is as a SEAL on a mission, or certainly in the operating room. And then, of course, death is just part of the job. I find it odd when I go to cocktail parties, whether this is back in the 90s when I was a SEAL officer, or now, and especially when I'm up in the ICU and we've had a couple of deaths that day, how routine death is in our job, or certainly my job, and that is extremely unusual. So if you take a look at some of the training comparisons, what I want to highlight is there is an equal amount of pain in both categories. It's just greatly shortened to become a SEAL. Okay. But some of the contrast, so when you got a frogman platoon, you've got various levels of education. You've got the 18, 19-year-old who was, basically the judge said, do you want to join the Navy or do you want to go to jail? And then you've got the Naval Academy graduate who's done, some training at MIT and then ended up doing Naval Special Warfare training. When you're dealing with surgeons, especially when you're dealing with residents in training, we all really have the same level of education. The SEAL community, we do everything together. Your platoon is your family. In the surgeon group, when work is done, you need to leave your family to go see your actual family. The only comparison I would make between a SEAL platoon and a surgeon really is the deployed military surgeon, which a lot of you know what I'm talking about, because that actually becomes a family for you. And then the next thing is you can criticize a SEAL very differently than you can the delicate flowers in medicine. And so I learned this very quickly, there are certain ways you can talk to a frogman and certain ways you can and cannot talk to civilian medical people. It seems funny, but this is actually more poignant than you might know. And give yourself a few years in the civilian practice and you'll recognize what I mean. So as far as leading an operator, this is either as a surgeon or as a SEAL. So either your life or the patient's life depends on the decisions that you're making. And that is critical. Again, that is not necessarily the case across all aspects of the military and all aspects in medicine, but certainly in the Spec Ops or the SEAL community, and certainly in the surgical community, you were truly dealing with life and death situations. There's a very small circle of trust. You have your own language. Even within the special operations community, whether you're SF or Ranger or CCT or SEAL or whatever, there is a certain circle of trust. You kind of know what other people have been through. And that's similar to the surgical group. Whether you meet another surgeon in your own hospital or as you travel to a conference like this, we have a common language. We have a common understanding of each other and, to some degree, a certain element of trust that you just can't yield to people outside of that circle of trust. But what I also find interesting is experts, whether you're a SEAL or a surgeon or whatever, you still need leadership. I remember watching back when Tiger Woods was just crushing it like 10 or 15 years ago, and they talked about his golf coach. And I thought, why would Tiger Woods have a golf coach? He is a coach. And now I'm up in Boston and they talk about Tom Brady's quarterback coach. And I'm like, why would Tom Brady need a quarterback coach? Because even experts need coaching. Whether you're a frogman doing a SEAL platoon workup, whether you're going to the sim center as an experienced surgeon, you still need leadership. You still need practice. You still need direction. So some of the parallels, between a SEAL and a surgeon, the first one may be hotly debated by some of my fellow officers and our platoon mates, but in general, SEAL guys, and I say guys because as of now it's all men, these are really intelligent people. In my first 16-man platoon, my point man subsequently did a Seaman to Admiral program and became an officer. My 60 gunner subsequently did a Seaman to Admiral program, became an officer. One of them went to VMI. One of them went to Providence College for undergrad. And in the squad behind me, our 60 gunner went to Harvard Law School. So after they spent some time in the teams, they either got out and did great things or they did great things within the SEAL community. Very intelligent people. And of course, same with the medical community. These are people that are very self-motivated. I always say it's really not that difficult to lead someone who is self-motivated. When I was an ROTC platoon leader and I had to get the freshman and sophomore to show up, to show up on time to do some marching drill ceremony, it's not that hard to get them to show up on time. It is a lot harder to get people to do what they should do when they're not intelligent, when they're not self-motivated, when they're not used to working in small groups. Luckily, my career has been with these people. But there are certainly differences between the two. So in a SEAL platoon, everyone is going to wear the trident. Everyone's been through the same training. You may have some support personnel during the mission, helo people, boat people, maybe some augmentees in the platoon. But in general, really the people, the boots on the ground doing the mission, everyone has been trained very similarly and is wearing the same trident. In a surgical team, not just with residents, but if you're running a code in the ICU, if you're running a trauma team down in the emergency department, if you're running a high-risk operation, you have a various levels of people in the room, and not all are doctors, and not all come with the same amount of training. And that can be extremely complicated, and it's very important to know how to lead these individuals and recognize what do they bring to the table, what are their gaps in knowledge, and what can they fill in that you may not have. So really, this is kind of the crux of it. What are the lessons learned? So one thing I've learned is leadership is different from authority, which is different from management. So this is not a TED Talk on leadership. This is all of my personal opinion. And there are actual definitions for leadership, authority, and management. But the way I see it is a leader is someone who shows people what to do by example. Someone with authority has been given power, whether they earned it or not, to make big level decisions that may affect your leadership. And then a manager, in my opinion, is basically someone who is taking personalities and setting people up for success and knowing how to manage these personalities to optimize the success of the team. Definitely critical in a platoon, definitely critical in a trauma bay or in the operating room. But the way I try to do it is I try to lead from example, recognizing that although I have a position of managerial power, and although I have been given a position of authority, to me that is irrelevant. It comes down to at 3 a.m, when a patient's on the table and they're bleeding out and no one's there to save you, how are you going to lead that team? Or if you're in a bad situation overseas and you don't have a lot of good visibility, you don't have overhead ISR giving you a bird's eye view of what can be in the surrounding area, people look for leaders. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast is a saying in the teams, but, and actually, Matt, you told me once, it's never fast if you have to do something twice. Just be slow, get it done, do it right the first time. I'll see my son who's fidgeting to run outside when he's late for school, and he'll tie his shoes like 3 times because he's not doing it right. If he had just slowed down, tie his shoelaces, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That's true with the SEALs, that's true in trauma, that's true running a code, that's true in the operating room. And try to be proactive. Try to predict what's ahead of you. Try to be 2 or 3 steps ahead. My first deployment to Afghanistan, there's a guy, Paul Lucia, who some of you might know. He's a colorectal guy. He's out of the Navy now. And he would always say, plan your operation for the next operation. Always be proactive. Always be kind of 1 step ahead. How am I on time? Okay. And then the last thing is just basic small group leadership strategies. Now, I don't base everything off of this. These are things I've come across, not in research for this talk, but just sayings that I've come across over the last few years or throughout my time as a leader that I feel like kind of speaks with me. And the first to me is probably the most important. You have your job as a frogman officer, you have your job as the ICU director, or you have your job as a surgeon, but nothing should ever be beneath you. So if you need to help clean up the operating room, if you need to put gear away, if you need to clean up the table, the exam room table in clinic, there should be nothing that is beneath you. Never have someone do something that you won't do for yourself. And if you can't do that, then you cannot lead from the front. So the SEAL motto is you're basically always going to put the team before everything. When a mission's done, you know, you're not taking off your gear and taking a shower and, you know, hydrating up. Well, you should be hydrating up, but you're not going to the galley and getting a bunch of food. The first thing you do is you take care of everything with the team that needs to be done. Then you got to take care of the platoon. And when everything else has been completed, then you take care of yourself. And again, that's also going down the line of leading from the front. If you show people that you're willing to sacrifice yourself physically times to help out the team, people will tend to follow you. And then kind of the other two you can read. So I actually feel like I could have taken any one scenario and probably given about an hour-long discussion on specifics of how the leadership between SEALs and surgeons kind of come together. But I was only given 20 minutes, and I wanted to just kind of broadly stroke across some of the lessons that I've learned. It's really an honor to lead a team. And despite what Vince Lombardi said, I actually think leaders are born. I think if you go out to a playground and see a bunch of 5-year-olds, it is very clear who the leader is. I went to high school for a couple of years with Kevin Plank. He runs Under Armour. It was very clear at freshman year orientation that that guy was a leader. There is kind of no question. You can go through courses. You can be appointed many things, but I actually think you're born with leadership, and if you don't have it, follow good leaders and learn how to do it, because it's an absolute honor and privilege to be able to lead people through very tough times. I really do take some of the lessons that I've learned, not the lessons that ROTC taught me to be an officer, but the lessons I learned in the field doing the job as a frogman officer to employ with what I do now. It's remarkable, and I never necessarily correlated those two together until I thought about this talk, but it is true. And I think we talk about a lot of similarities between aviation and medicine, but I think there's clearly far more similarities between military and medicine. And it's not just military surgeons and civilian surgeons, and it's not just the high-speed spec ops guys and the in the middle of the night patient dying on the table. There are many, many lessons learned throughout subspecialties in the military and throughout subspecialties in medicine that I think can be learned. And so I applaud Dr. Ritter for kind of bringing this together. It's an honor to be up here. And I guess at the end, I'll answer any questions. Thank you.